Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Killian, but everyone calls me Red on account of my hair. I've been a forest ranger for 3 years now, stationed up in the New River Gorge area of West Virginia. It's August 1958, and this is the worst drought anyone's seen in decades. The trees are so dry they crackle when the wind blows through them, and every day feels like we're sitting on a powder keg waiting for a spark. I'm 24 years old, and I know what you're thinking. Too young for this job, too green to be trusted with people's lives. Maybe you're right. But I fought in Korea for 2 years, and when I came back, all I wanted was peace and quiet. The fire tower at Blackwater Falls gives me plenty of both. 40 miles from the nearest town, 72 hours alone with nothing but my binoculars, radio, and thoughts. My fiancée Sarah thinks I'm crazy for taking the job. "Why do you want to be alone all the time, Red?" she asks. But she doesn't understand. After what I saw over there, the bodies, the screaming, the way men can become animals. Sometimes, being alone feels like the only way to stay human. The tower stands 80 feet tall, made of steel beams that groan and sway in the wind. From up here, I can see for miles in every direction, rolling green hills, deep rocky gorges, and endless forests stretching to the horizon. It's beautiful country, but it's got a dark history. Local folks tell stories about these mountains that go back generations. They call it the Bear Devil, something that comes out during disasters to hunt people. I carry my father's old service revolver and his lucky rabbit's foot everywhere I go. Dad died in a mining accident 10 years ago, right here in these same mountains. Mom gave me his things before I left for Korea, said they'd keep me safe. So far, they have. This morning started like any other. Coffee at dawn, weather report at 6, radio check-in at 8. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the birds weren't singing. In 3 years of doing this job, I'd learned to trust my gut when something felt off. Around noon, I spotted smoke on the eastern ridge. Not the thin white smoke of a campfire, but thick black columns rising fast, forest fire, and it was spreading quick. I radioed it into headquarters and started tracking its movement through my binoculars. That's when I saw them, a family of deer running flat out through the trees below. But they weren't running from the fire. They were running toward it, which made no sense. Animals flee from flames, they don't race into them. I watched through my scope as they disappeared into the smoke, and that's when I heard it, a roar. Not like any animal I'd ever heard before, not in these mountains or anywhere else. It was deep and loud enough to rattle the tower windows. My hands shook as I adjusted the binoculars, trying to see what had made that sound. The radio crackled to life. "Tower 7, this is base. We've got reports of something attacking the evacuation crews on the eastern ridge. Sheriff Bradley's heading up there now." I keyed the microphone. "Base, this is Tower 7. What kind of attacks?" Static filled the air for a long moment. When the voice came back, it sounded shaken. "We don't know, Red," the crews are saying. Well, they're saying it's not human. By 2 o'clock, the fire had grown into a monster. I could see flames jumping from tree to tree, creating their own wind as they burned. The smoke was so thick it blocked out the sun, turning day into an orange twilight. But I couldn't take my eyes off the eastern ridge where those crews had been attacked. Through my binoculars, I swept the area looking for any sign of Sheriff Bradley or his men. The radio had gone quiet an hour ago, which wasn't like them. Protocol said to check in every 30 minutes during an emergency. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow moving through the trees. But shadows don't walk upright, and they sure don't move with purpose. This thing was huge, had to be 12 feet tall at least, and it was walking straight through the wall of flames like they weren't even there. My hands trembled as I focused the binoculars. The creature was covered in dark fur, almost black, with arms longer than any man's. Its eyes glowed like burning coals in the smoke. But what made my blood freeze was that it looked right at me. Across all those miles, through all that smoke, it looked directly up at my tower. Then it did something that made me question my sanity. It drew one massive claw across its throat in a slow, deliberate motion. A threat. A promise. I grabbed the radio microphone. "Base, this is Tower 7. We have a situation up here. There's something in the fire zone, something big." Static answered me. "Base, do you copy? This is Tower 7, calling base. Nothing but white noise." I tried the emergency frequency. Dead. Even my personal radio was picking up nothing but static mixed with sounds that couldn't be real. Sounds like screaming, but not human screaming. Like the radio was pulling in signals from hell itself. That's when I noticed the deer. They were running out of the forest now, but they weren't running from the fire anymore. They were running from something else. Something that was hurting them, driving them toward my tower. The first one burst from the tree line below me, eyes white with terror. Then another. Then a whole herd, maybe 20 deer, all fleeing in the same direction. But what came behind them made me drop my binoculars. Sheriff Bradley's patrol car rolled out of the smoke, but it wasn't driving. It was tumbling end over end down the rocky slope like someone had picked it up and thrown it. When it finally stopped against a boulder, I could see through my scope that the roof had been peeled back like a tin can. I grabbed my father's revolver and checked the cylinder. 6 bullets. Whatever was down there, I had 6 chances to stop it. The creature stepped out of the flames. Up close, it was even bigger than I'd thought. 14 feet of muscle and fur and teeth, walking on 2 legs like a man but moving with the grace of something wild. Its fur was charcoal black, singed but not burned by the fire. When it opened its mouth, I could see rows of teeth like broken glass. It looked up at my tower again, and this time it smiled. Actually smiled, like it knew something I didn't. Then it started to climb. Not the tower. There was no way anything that big could climb these steel beams. But it was climbing the rocky ridge that led up to my platform. Moving fast, using claws the size of railroad spikes to pull itself up the cliff face. Each claw mark left gouges in the stone like it was soft wood. I raised the revolver and took aim. The distance was maybe 200 yards. A difficult shot, but I'd made harder ones in Korea. I squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit the creature's center mass. I saw the impact, saw the fur fly. But instead of dropping, the thing just looked annoyed. Like I'd thrown a pebble at it. It roared again, and this time the sound was so loud it shattered every window in the tower. The radio equipment exploded in sparks. Even my wristwatch stopped working. When the sound faded, I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. I was completely cut off. No radio, no telephone, no way to call for help. The fire had surrounded the base of my tower while I'd been watching the creature. I was trapped between a forest fire below and a monster above. And night was coming. The creature disappeared into the smoke just as the sun went down, but I could feel it out there. Watching. Waiting. The fire had crept closer to the tower base, close enough that I could feel the heat even 80 feet up. But I couldn't worry about burning to death when something worse was hunting me. I searched the tower from top to bottom, looking for anything that might help me survive. In the basement storage area, I found something that changed everything. A skeleton, still wearing a ranger uniform. The name tag read, H. Vance. Next to the bones was a leather journal, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. The first entry was dated the 15th of August, 1938. 20 years ago, almost to the day, asterisk. My name is Harold Vance, and if you're reading this, then the fire devil has returned. It comes every generation during the great burns, when the forest is dry enough to carry its flames. The Cherokee knew about it, called it the Flame Walker. They had ways to fight it, but their knowledge died with them. Asterisk, asterisk. It feeds on terror and human flesh. Fire can't hurt it. Regular bullets bounce off like raindrops. But there is a way to kill it. Sacred weapons, blessed by Cherokee medicine, I found some of their tools hidden in a cave near the base of this ridge. If you're brave enough to face it, look for the cave marked with the spiral symbol. Asterisk, asterisk. The creature is smart. It will try to break your mind before it breaks your body. Don't listen to the voices. Don't believe what it shows you. And whatever you do, don't come down from this tower until dawn. That's when its power is weakest. Asterisk. The journal was filled with sketches of the creature, detailed observations of its behavior, and rough maps of the local Cherokee sites. But what caught my attention was a drawing of my father's rabbit's foot. In the journal, it was labeled Cherokee Protection Charm. I pulled the rabbit's foot from my pocket and looked at it with new eyes. The fur wasn't rabbit at all. It was too soft, too fine. And carved into the wooden base were tiny symbols that I'd never noticed before. Symbols that matched the ones in Vance's journal. A sound from outside made me freeze. Voices calling my name. "Red! Red! Help us!" It was Sheriff Bradley's voice, coming from somewhere, in the smoke below. "We're trapped down here, son. The fire's got us surrounded." I knew it was impossible. I'd seen Bradley's car tumble down the ridge like a toy. But the voice sounded so real, so desperate. "Red, please, we're burning." I started toward the ladder before my brain caught up. The journal had warned about this. The creature could mimic human voices, use them to lure victims. But knowing that didn't make it easier to ignore the pleading in Bradley's voice. "My daughter, Red, she's with me. Please, you have to help my little girl." Bradley didn't have a daughter. He'd never been married. But the voice was perfect, exactly like his. If I hadn't known better, I would have climbed down that ladder and walked straight into the creature's claws. The voices kept coming all night. My mother calling for me to come home. Soldiers from my unit in Korea screaming for a medic. And worst of all, my father's voice. "Son, I'm hurt real bad. I need you to come. Help your old man." It was exactly how he would have said it. The same words he'd used when I was 8 years old, and he'd cut his hand fixing the porch steps. I pressed my hands against my ears, but I could still hear him. "Don't leave me down here alone, Red. I'm scared." By midnight, I was crying. Not from fear, though I was plenty scared, but from the heartbreak of hearing my father's voice and knowing I couldn't help him. Knowing he was dead and gone, and this thing was wearing his memory like a mask. That's when the helicopter came. I heard the rotor blades cutting through the night air and saw searchlights sweeping the smoke. A rescue chopper from the state police, coming to pull me out. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the platform, signaling them with everything I had. The pilot was Jim Morrison, a good man I had met a few times at the ranger station. He brought the aircraft in low, hovering just above the tower platform. His co-pilot, Steve Phillips, was working the rescue winch, preparing to drop a line. "Hold on, Red." Morrison's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "We'll have you out of there in 2 minutes." I was reaching for the rescue line when the creature struck. It came out of the smoke like a cannonball, leaping impossible distances to hit the helicopter broadside. The aircraft spun like a top, Morrison fighting to keep it airborne. But the creature held on, its claws punched right through the metal hull. Phillips screamed as the beast reached through the cabin and grabbed him. I watched in horror as it pulled him out of the helicopter piece by piece. The sounds he made weren't human anymore. They were the sounds an animal makes when it's being eaten alive. Morrison tried to shake the creature loose by flying erratic patterns, but it was too late. The beast reached into the cockpit and dragged him out too. But this time, it looked right at me as it began to feed, making sure I saw every detail, every drop of blood. The helicopter crashed into the side of my tower, and suddenly I wasn't 80 feet above the ground anymore. The impact knocked out half the support beams and left the whole structure swaying like a tree in the wind. The creature dropped from the wreckage and landed on the platform below me, close enough that I could smell its breath. It stank like sulfur and rotting meat. For the first time, it spoke, not in a human voice it had stolen, but in its own voice. Deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "Come down, little ranger. Time to feed." The tower groaned and swayed with every movement I made. Half the support structure was gone, and the rest wouldn't hold much longer. The creature stood on the platform directly below me, close enough that I could see the human blood still dripping from its claws. I had two choices. Stay up here and burn when the tower collapsed, or go down there and face that thing with nothing but my father's old revolver, and whatever Cherokee magic might be hidden in his rabbit's foot. The creature seemed to read my thoughts. It grabbed one of the remaining support beams and began to bend it like soft metal. The whole tower shuddered and tilted 15 degrees. Tools and equipment crashed down around me. "Getting warm up there?" It laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "Fire's coming closer. Soon you'll cook like the others." I looked at Vance's journal again, studying his sketches of the Cherokee protection symbols. According to his notes, the rabbit's foot wasn't just a charm. It was part of a larger ritual, a way to bless weapons with the power to kill supernatural creatures. But I needed fire to complete the ceremony. Sacred fire, made with specific prayers and offerings. The creature was providing plenty of fire. The question was whether I could stay alive long enough to use it. I pulled out my father's revolver and emptied the cylinder, examining each bullet carefully. In the journal, Vance had drawn detailed pictures of silver bullets carved with Cherokee symbols. I didn't have silver, but I had something else. My father's wedding ring, passed down from his grandfather. Pure silver, worn thin from generations of wear. I used my knife to carve shavings from the ring, pressing them into the soft lead of each bullet. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. The tower tilted another 10 degrees. I was running out of time. Following Vance's instructions, I built a small fire in the metal trash can, using pages from the journal as kindling. As the flames caught, I held the rabbit's foot above them and spoke the Cherokee words written in Vance's careful handwriting. I didn't know what they meant, but I felt their power. The symbols on the rabbit's foot began to glow with a soft blue light. The creature sensed what I was doing. It roared in rage and began tearing at the tower's supports with both hands, bending steel beams like they were made of cardboard. The whole structure lurched sideways, and I had to grab the radio equipment to keep from falling. "No!" it screamed. "Not again. I won't be banished again." I held each bullet in the sacred flame, speaking the Cherokee prayers. As the silver melted into the lead, the bullets began to glow with the same blue light as the rabbit's foot. Whatever power my father had carried, whatever protection the Cherokee had built into their sacred objects, it was flowing into my ammunition. The creature made its final assault on the tower. It climbed the damaged structure like a ladder, its claws finding purchase in the twisted metal. In seconds, it would be close enough to tear me apart. I loaded the blessed bullets into my father's revolver and took aim. The first shot hit the creature's center mass. This time, it didn't bounce off. The bullet burned through its fur like a hot coal through paper. The beast screamed and nearly lost its grip on the tower. The second shot took it in the shoulder, spinning it around. Blue fire spread from the wound, and I could smell burning flesh. But it kept climbing. The third and fourth shots hit it in the chest, each one burning bigger holes. The creature's roars were deafening, but it was still coming, still reaching for me with those massive claws. The tower finally gave up. The remaining support beams snapped all at once, and the whole structure collapsed. I fell 80 feet through the twisted metal, crashing through the platform where the creature had been standing just seconds before. I hit the ground hard enough to break bones. My left arm was twisted at an impossible angle, obviously shattered. Blood ran down my face from a dozen cuts. But somehow, I still had my father's revolver. And somehow, I still had 2 bullets left. The creature stood over me, breathing hard. Blue fire ate at its wounds, but it was still very much alive. Very much angry. "You cannot kill me," it growled. "I am. Older than your mountains. Older than your people." It reached down with claws like railroad spikes, and I saw my death in its burning eyes. But as it leaned close, I pressed the revolver against its skull and pulled the trigger. The blessed bullet blew apart the creature's head in an explosion of blue flame. But I wasn't done. As its body began to fall, I put the last bullet through its heart. The creature died in a column of supernatural fire that reached toward the stars. The flame was so bright it lit up the entire forest, so hot it turned sand to glass. And when it finally faded, the forest fire was gone. Completely extinguished, as if it had never been. I lay there in the ash and silence, watching my blood soak into the ground. My left arm was gone from the elbow down, torn away when the tower collapsed. Third-degree burns covered most of my body. I should have died right there. But I didn't die. Maybe the Cherokee magic that had blessed my bullets also blessed me. Maybe my father's protection was stronger than I'd known. Or maybe I was just too stubborn to quit. I crawled 3 miles through the ashes and char to reach the main road. It took 6 hours, leaving a trail of blood behind me like a wounded animal. When the state police finally found me, I was unconscious and barely breathing. I spent 8 months in the burn unit at Charleston General Hospital. 23 surgeries to rebuild what the creature and the fire had destroyed. The doctors said my survival was a medical miracle. They couldn't explain how I'd lived through such massive trauma. But they didn't know about Cherokee magic. They didn't know about my father's protection, charm, or the power that flows through these mountains when ancient evil walks the earth. The official report said lightning struck the fire tower, causing it to collapse. The helicopter crash was blamed on extreme wind conditions caused by the fire. No mention of any creature, no acknowledgement of the truth. My testimony was dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations. Sarah left me during my recovery. She couldn't handle what I'd become, the scars, the missing arm, the nightmares that made me scream in my sleep. I don't blame her. The man who came down from that mountain wasn't the same one she'd agreed to marry. But I wasn't alone for long. 3 weeks after I got out of the hospital, an old Cherokee man visited me. He said his name was Joseph Crowfeather, and his grandfather had known my father, had given him that rabbit's foot when they worked together in the mines. "Your father saved my grandfather's life in a cave-in," the old man said. "My grandfather wanted to return the favor. The protection charm has been in our family for 6 generations, waiting for the right time." He told me things about these mountains that aren't written in any book, about creatures that sleep in the deep caves, waiting for disasters to wake them, about the Cherokee warriors, who once kept these things in check, and how their knowledge was almost lost when the government drove them away. "The Flame Walker was just one of many," he said. "There are others, different creatures, different hungers, but they all wake up when people are suffering, feed on pain and fear and death." He taught me to recognize the signs, the patterns that meant something supernatural was stirring. Gave me weapons blessed with the old power. Silver bullets, carved with protective symbols, knives forged in sacred fire. Made me promise to watch for the next one. That was 5 years ago. Since then, I've investigated 17 reports of unusual creature activity in the Appalachian Mountains. 15 turned out to be hoaxes or misidentification. But 2 were real. 2 required the kind of intervention that doesn't make it into official reports. Other rangers think I'm crazy. They call me Crazy Red behind my back, the burned-up ranger who talks about monsters. But some of them listen when I warn them about certain areas during certain times. Some of them have learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong in the deep woods. Because the truth is, the Flame Walker wasn't unique. It was just the first one I encountered. These mountains are full of old things, sleeping things, things that remember when this land was different. Most of the time, they stay hidden, content to hunt animals and the occasional hiker who wanders too far from marked trails. But when disasters strike, big fires, mining accidents, severe storms, they wake up hungry. They remember what human fear tastes like. I keep my father's revolver loaded with blessed silver bullets. I carry the Cherokee protection charm everywhere I go. And sometimes, late at night, I still feel phantom pain in my missing arm. Still feel the creature's claws, even though it's been dead for 5 years. My friends ask why I stay in these mountains after what happened. Why I don't move to the city, find a safe job somewhere far from the deep woods and dark hollows. The answer is simple. Something has to watch. Someone has to stand guard against the things that hunt us when we're weakest. The Cherokee warriors are mostly gone, their knowledge scattered. The old protections are failing. But some of us remember. Some of us keep the watch. Last week, I got a report of strange animal attacks near Seneca Rocks. Hikers found with claw marks that don't match any known predator. Witnesses describing something that walks upright through the forest. Something with glowing eyes and an appetite for human flesh. I'm driving up there tomorrow. My truck is loaded with blessed weapons and Cherokee protection charms. I've got a new partner now. A young ranger named Tommy who's willing to listen when the old-timers talk about things that shouldn't exist. Because they do exist. They're out there right now, waiting for the next disaster, the next opportunity to hunt. And when they wake up hungry, someone needs to be ready to send them back to sleep. My name is Marcus Killian, and I'm a ranger in the West Virginia mountains. I hunt things that hunt people. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I was called to. And the mountains are still full of monsters. My name is Sarah Beth Morrison, but everyone calls me Cricket. I got that name when I was little because I could never sit still, always jumping around like a cricket in tall grass. Now I'm 28 years old, and I've been a park ranger for 7 years, in the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm the first woman to work this district, which means I have to prove myself every single day. It was October 1974 when everything went wrong. The fall leaves were at their prettiest, bright reds and golds covering the mountains like a giant quilt. Tourist season was at its peak, which meant Cades Cove was packed with families wanting to see the colors and maybe spot some black bears. Cades Cove is an 11-mile loop road that goes through a valley surrounded by mountains. During the day, it's beautiful. Lots of open meadows with old log cabins from the 1800s scattered around. But at night, it becomes something else entirely. The thick forest presses in close to the road, and you can drive for miles without seeing another soul. That's where I work the night shift. Just me, my radio, and my 357 Magnum that used to belong to my grandmother. She gave it to me, along with a silver cross before she died. Some things in these mountains don't belong to God, she used to say. I thought she was just telling old stories. My divorce had just gone through that summer. My ex-husband Tony used to hit me when he drank, which was most nights. He always said I wasn't worth much, that no one would ever want a woman trying to do a man's job. Part of me was scared he might be right. That's why this job meant everything to me. I had to show that I could protect these families just as good as any man. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday night in early October. I was driving my patrol route around 10 o'clock when my radio started acting up. Instead of the usual clear signal, all I could hear was static mixed with what sounded like howling. But we don't have wolves in the Big Smokies. Haven't had them for over 100 years. I stopped the truck and tried to adjust the radio. That's when I heard it clearly. A long, deep howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I'd heard plenty of coyotes before, but this was different, bigger, meaner. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. The October air was crisp and smelled like dying leaves. Everything was quiet except for the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard something else, a snapping sound, like a large branch breaking. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across the tree line. For just a second, I thought I saw something move between the trees. Something big, but when I aimed the light that way, there was nothing there. I got back in the truck and tried the radio again. This time it worked fine. "Ranger Morrison to base," I said into the microphone. "Go ahead, Cricket," came the voice of Jim Walsh, the night dispatcher. "Did you get any reports of wolves in the area?" There was a pause. "Wolves?" "Cricket, you know we don't have wolves here. Maybe it was a coyote?" "Maybe," I said, but I knew it wasn't. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet. Usually I'd see deer or raccoons crossing the road, but there was nothing. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. On Friday night, I found the first sign. I was checking the campgrounds when my headlights caught something white on the ground. I stopped and walked over to investigate. It was a child's shoe, a little red sneaker, size maybe 7 or 8. But there were no campers registered for that area, and the nearest family campsite was 2 miles away. I picked up the shoe and examined it with my flashlight. The laces were torn, and there were what looked like claw marks on the leather. Big ones, much bigger than anything a bear would make. I should have called it in right then, should have requested backup. But I was still new enough that I worried about looking foolish. A woman calling for help over a lost shoe? Tony's voice echoed in my head. "See, Cricket, you're not cut out for this." I put the shoe in my truck and made a note to check for any missing persons reports in the morning. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness between the trees. Saturday morning came gray and cold. I should have been off duty, but I couldn't stop thinking about that little red shoe. I drove back to the spot where I'd found it and searched the area in daylight. What I found made my stomach drop. About 50 yards into the woods, there were tracks. Not bear tracks, I knew those by heart. These were different. They looked like dog prints, but huge. The biggest ones were easily 6 inches across. And here's what made no sense. Some of the tracks showed a dog walking, on 4 legs, but others looked like something had been walking on just 2 legs, like a person. I followed the trail deeper into the forest. The tracks led to a small clearing where the ground was torn up like there had been a fight. Broken branches hung from the trees, some of them 12 feet up. There were scraps of cloth caught on the thorns, blue denim, and something that looked like a child's yellow t-shirt. That's when I found the blood. It wasn't much, just dark stains on some leaves and rocks. But it was enough to make everything real. Something bad had happened here, and I was probably looking at evidence of it. I radioed for backup and spent the next hour marking the scene. When Ranger Tom Bradley arrived, he took one look at the tracks and shook his head. "Probably just dogs from one of the cabins," he said. "You know how it is. People let their pets run wild up here." "Tom, look at the size of these prints and explain to me how a dog walks on 2 legs." He got down and examined the tracks more carefully. His face went pale. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted. "But there's got to be a logical explanation." We searched the area for the rest of the morning but found no other clues. The red shoe went into evidence, and I filed a report about possible lost hikers. The whole time, I had the feeling we were missing something important. That night, I was back on patrol. The Henderson family had registered for a campsite in Cades Cove, 2 parents and their twin boys, ages 8 and 10. Nice folks from Atlanta, just wanting to show their kids the mountains. I checked on them around 9 p.m. Tom Henderson was teaching the boys how to build a proper campfire while his wife Linda organized their gear. The boys were excited about sleeping in a tent for the first time. "You folks doing okay?" I asked, stepping out of my patrol truck. "Just fine, Ranger," Tom said with a smile. "Beautiful country you've got here. Make sure you store all your food in the bear box," I told them. "We've had some unusual animal activity lately." Linda looked worried. "What kind of activity?" I didn't want to scare them, but I needed them to be careful. "Probably nothing serious. Just keep everything sealed up tight and stay close to your campsite after dark." I left them roasting marshmallows and singing camp songs. They looked so happy and safe. I should have made them leave right then. 2 hours later, I was driving the far end of the loop when my radio crackled to life. "Any unit in Cades Cove? We have a 911 call about screaming in Campground Area 3. Caller disconnected before we could get details. Area 3. That was where the Hendersons were camping. I hit my lights and siren and raced through the winding road faster than I'd ever driven it. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Something told me I was already too late. When I reached their campsite, my headlights showed the scene that will haunt me forever. The tent was completely destroyed, not just torn. It looked like something had exploded it from the inside. Pieces of blue nylon hung from tree branches 30 feet away. Their picnic table was flipped over and broken in half. The fire was scattered, leaving glowing embers across the clearing. But what made me sick was the silence. No voices calling for help. No sounds of anyone moving around. Just dead, awful silence. I grabbed my flashlight and called out, "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson, this is Ranger Morrison." Nothing. I found Tom first, about 20 yards from the campsite. I won't describe what was left of him, except to say that no bear could have done that kind of damage. Linda was further out, near the tree line. The same story. The boys were gone. I searched the area with my flashlight, calling their names until my voice was raw. Finally, I found the drag marks, 2 sets leading into the thick forest. The tracks around them were those same impossible footprints I'd seen before. But now there were more of them. Lots more. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I heard it. A long, echoing howl that seemed to come from deep in the mountains. It was answered by another howl, then another. They sounded like they were celebrating. I should have waited for backup. Should have called the state police and let them handle it. But those were just little boys out there, and every minute counted. I followed the drag marks into the forest, my flashlight cutting a small circle of light in the darkness. The trail was easy to follow, broken branches, disturbed leaves, and every few yards, a small piece of torn clothing. After about 10 minutes of walking, I heard voices ahead. Children's voices, crying and calling for their parents. Relief flooded through me. They were alive. I moved faster, trying to be quiet. That's when I realized the voices were coming from above me. I looked up and saw them. Both boys, somehow caught in the branches of a tall oak tree about 20 feet off the ground. They were tangled up in what looked like clothing and camping gear. "Hold on," I called up to them. "I'm coming to get you down." But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The boys weren't moving. They were just hanging there, making those crying sounds, but their bodies were perfectly still. That's when I understood. Those weren't the boys at all. Something was making those sounds, using their voices to call me deeper into the forest. I backed away from the tree, my heart hammering in my chest. The fake crying stopped immediately, replaced by a low growling that seemed to come from all around me. I wasn't alone in these woods. I ran back toward the campsite faster than I'd ever run in my life. Branches tore at my uniform, and my flashlight beam bounced wildly as I crashed through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear something big, moving through the trees, keeping pace with me easily. When I reached the clearing, 3 other rangers were already there, along with an ambulance crew. The sight of Tom and Linda Henderson in the bright lights was even worse than it had been in my flashlight beam. "Cricket," called Ranger Bradley. "Where the hell have you been? We've been looking for you." "The boys," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "Something took the boys. There are tracks leading into the forest. We need search teams, dogs, helicopters." "Slow down," said Supervisor Patterson, a heavy-set man who'd never liked having a woman on his staff. "Tell us exactly what you saw." I tried to explain about the drag marks, the impossible tracks, the voices in the trees. With each word, I could see the doubt growing in their faces. "So you followed an unknown trail into the forest alone?" Patterson shook his head. "That's not protocol, Morrison. You should have waited for backup. There wasn't time. Those boys are still out there." "We're still out there," Patterson corrected grimly. "We found them about a mile downstream." "I'm sorry, Cricket." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Those little boys who'd been so excited about their first camping trip were gone. And somehow, something had used their voices to try to lure me deeper into the woods. The official report blamed the deaths on a rogue black bear. Patterson said it was the worst bear attack in park history, but these things happen sometimes. The case was closed within a week. But I knew better. Bears don't arrange bodies in trees to mimic human voices. Bears don't leave tracks that show them walking on 2 legs. I started researching everything I could find about unusual animal behavior in the Smokies. I drove to Cherokee and talked to the old-timers, the ones who remembered the stories their grandfathers told. Most of them wouldn't talk to me, a white woman asking about their sacred stories. But one, old man named Joseph Crowfeather, finally opened up. "You're asking about the wolf that walks like a man," he said, studying my face carefully. "My grandfather called them the hungry ones. They were wolves who broke the sacred laws, who chose to hunt the 2-legged ones. The spirits punished them by making them neither wolf nor man, always hungry, always hunting." "Are they real?" I asked. "Real enough to kill that family last week," he said. "Real enough that you'd better start carrying blessed silver bullets in that gun of yours." 3 weeks later, the Miller family came to camp in Cades Cove. Robert and Jennifer Miller, with their 2 kids, Lisa and Kevin. They were from Ohio, celebrating their wedding anniversary with a family trip. I tried to talk them out of camping overnight, made up excuses about bear activity, about unsafe conditions. But they'd driven 8 hours to get there and had reservations. Patterson overruled me and told them they could stay. "Morrison's a little jumpy since the Henderson incident," he told them with a laugh. "Don't worry, we've got everything under control." That night I stayed close to their campsite. Too close, according to Patterson. But I didn't care. Those kids were not going to die on my watch. Around midnight, I was parked about a quarter-mile away when I heard Jennifer Miller screaming. This time, I was ready. I hit my lights and drove straight into their campsite, radio already in hand calling for backup. What I saw there changed everything I thought I knew about what we were dealing with. The Miller's RV was rocking back and forth like something huge was inside it. The aluminum siding had been torn open in several places, leaving ragged holes big enough for a person to crawl through. Through the holes, I could see Robert Miller fighting with something dark and massive. I jumped out of my truck with my gun drawn. "Park Service, get away from the vehicle!" That's when I saw it, clearly for the first time. A creature that stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark gray fur, with a wolf's head on a man's body. It was holding Robert Miller in its claws like he weighed nothing. Its yellow eyes looked right at me, and I heard a sound I'll never forget. A deep, rumbling laugh. It dropped Robert and turned to face me. Blood dripped from its massive jaws. When it spoke, its voice was like gravel mixed with a growl. "Little ranger girl," it said, "we've been waiting for you." I fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets hit it, and it staggered back, but didn't go down. Black blood splattered on the RV's side, but the thing just looked annoyed. "Iron bullets," it said, shaking its head like I'd disappointed it. "You need to do better than that." It grabbed Jennifer Miller as she tried to run past it and threw her against a tree. The sound her body made when it hit will haunt me forever. I kept firing until my gun was empty, but the creature just advanced on me slowly, like it was enjoying my fear. When I reached for my spare ammo, it spoke again. "Your time is coming, Cricket Morrison. But not tonight. Tonight, we finish our meal." It turned back toward the RV where the children were screaming. I reloaded as fast as I could, but by the time I had bullets in the gun again, the thing was gone. It had vanished into the forest like smoke, taking both children with it. Robert and Jennifer Miller were dead. Lisa and Kevin were never found alive. The next morning, I drove to Cherokee and bought every piece of silver jewelry I could find. I melted it down and cast my own bullets with my grandmother's old equipment. If that thing wanted to play games, I was going to be ready for the next round. But the pack, because I was now sure there was more than one, had other plans. They started stalking me personally. I'd be driving my patrol route and catch glimpses of large shapes moving parallel to the road. I'd find massive paw prints in the mud around my cabin. Sometimes at night, I'd hear my name being called from the forest, in voices I recognized. Tom Henderson, Jennifer Miller, even my ex-husband Tony. They were studying me, learning my patterns. And I was starting to understand that this wasn't just about hunting random tourists anymore. This was personal. The thing that called itself the Alpha had made this a war between us, and I was going to need more than silver bullets to survive it. The final confrontation came on Halloween night. I should have seen the irony coming. For 2 weeks after the Miller family died, the park was quiet. Too quiet. No more attacks, no more sightings. Patterson thought whatever had been killing people had moved on. He started letting families camp overnight again. But I knew better. The pack was planning something big. I'd been working double shifts, patrolling every night, sleeping in my truck. My supervisor told me to take some time off, said I was getting paranoid. But I couldn't leave. Those things were still out there, and more people were going to die. That's when I found the messages. Written in what looked like charcoal on trees throughout Cades Cove were words in rough, scratchy letters. "Cricket comes alone, midnight at the old church. Bring your silver bullets." The old church was a historic cabin near the middle of the cove loop. It sat in an open meadow, surrounded by forest on all sides. If I went there alone, I'd be walking into a trap with no chance of backup or escape. I went anyway. I loaded my 357 with the silver bullets I'd made and drove to the church just before midnight. My radio was full of static again, which meant they were nearby. I could feel them watching me from the tree line as I walked across the meadow. The church door was open. Inside, candles had been lit, casting dancing shadows on the old wooden walls. At the altar, they had laid out their trophies. Ranger, badges, pieces of clothing, children's toys. All the things they'd taken from their victims. "You came," said a familiar voice behind me. I turned and saw the Alpha standing in the doorway. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I remembered. 9 feet of muscle and fur and hatred, with intelligence burning in those yellow eyes. "Let's finish this," I said, raising my gun. It laughed, that horrible sound like rocks grinding together. "Finish? Oh, Cricket, we're just getting started. Do you know how long we've been hunting in these mountains? Your grandfather's grandfather was a baby when we made our first kill here." "You're not from here," I said, remembering Joseph Crowfeather's stories. "You're something that shouldn't exist. We exist because we choose to exist. We were wolves once, yes. But we grew tired of hunting deer and rabbits. We wanted bigger game, smarter prey, so we made a deal with darker powers than your Cherokee friends ever dreamed of." The Alpha stepped closer, and I could smell the stench of old blood and decay coming off its fur. We offered our wolf nature to become something more, something that could hunt the greatest prey of all, humans. But the spirits punished us for our choice, made us neither wolf nor man, cursed us to be always hungry, always hunting, never satisfied. Then I'll send you back to whatever hell you came from, I said, and fired. The silver bullet took it in the shoulder, and it roared in pain and rage. Black blood sprayed across the church walls. But instead of going down, it just got angry. Silver hurts, it snarled. But it won't kill us. Nothing will kill us. We are eternal. It lunged at me faster than anything that big should be able to move. Its claws raked across my face, leaving burning gouges from my temple to my chin. I rolled away and fired again, hitting it in the leg. The pack came then. 6 more creatures, smaller than the alpha but just as deadly. They surrounded the church, cutting off any escape. Through the windows, I could see their yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. "You have 2 choices, Cricket Morrison," the alpha said, advancing on me despite its wounds. "Join us willingly and become what we are, or die fighting and become food for our young." "There's a 3rd choice," I said, reaching into my jacket. I pulled out my grandmother's silver cross, the one she'd blessed every Sunday for 40 years. The alpha stopped moving when it saw it. "Impossible," it whispered. The cross was glowing with soft white light, and where the light touched the alpha's fur, smoke began to rise. The other pack members backed away from the windows, whimpering like beaten dogs. "My grandmother knew what you were," I said, standing up. "She told me stories about the hungry ones, about wolves that sold their souls for the chance to hunt humans. She blessed this cross to protect me from things that didn't belong to God." The alpha tried to rush me again, but the light from the cross stopped it like a wall. It clawed at the air, but couldn't get closer than 5 feet. "This ends now," I said, and pressed the cross against its chest. The scream that came out of the alpha wasn't anything that should come from a living throat. It was the sound of something being torn apart from the inside. Black smoke poured off its body as it collapsed to the church floor, writhing in agony. The other pack members felt it too. Through the pack telepathy they shared, the alpha's pain became their pain. One by one, they howled and fled into the forest. As the alpha died, it looked up at me with eyes that were becoming more human. "You don't understand," it whispered. "We're not the only ones. There are others. In other mountains, other forests." Then it was gone, leaving only a pile of ash and the smell of sulfur. I stood alone in the old church, bleeding from the claw marks on my face, holding my grandmother's cross. The candles had burned out, but the cross still glowed with that soft white light. Outside, I could hear the surviving pack members howling in the distance, but they were moving away, back into the deep mountains. The alpha's death had broken their coordination, scattered them. For now, Cade's Cove was safe. The official report said I'd been attacked by a rabid bear while investigating vandalism at the historic church. The claw marks on my face left permanent scars that I carry to this day. Patterson recommended me for a transfer to another park, said I needed a fresh start after all the trauma I'd been through. What he didn't know was that the transfer was exactly what I wanted. Over the next few years, I moved from park to park throughout Appalachia, always watching for signs of pack activity. I found them in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Kentucky. Always the same pattern: families disappearing, impossible tracks, local legends of wolfmen or dog devils. The alpha had been telling the truth. There were others. I started building a network of female rangers who'd had similar experiences. Women who'd been written off as hysterical or traumatized, whose reports of supernatural encounters were buried in files marked unsolved or animal attack. We developed our own communication system, our own methods for sharing information. We learned to make silver bullets, to identify pack behavior, to recognize the signs of supernatural predators moving into an area. Some called us crazy, but the families we saved, the attacks we prevented, proved that crazy or not, we were necessary. I never married again, never had children of my own. My life became the hunt, the endless tracking of creatures that shouldn't exist but do. I've killed 3 more pack leaders over the years, scattered their followers, saved dozens of families from becoming victims. But there are always more packs. The hunger that drives them doesn't die, it just finds new forms. I'm 52 years old now, and I still patrol the mountains at night. My hair is gray, and my face is marked with scars from a dozen different encounters, but my eyes are still sharp, and my aim is still true. The silver cross my grandmother gave me never leaves my neck, and my gun is always loaded with silver bullets. Last week, I got a call from a young ranger in Colorado, Jessica Martinez, 24 years old, first woman in her district. She'd found some unusual tracks near a family campground, and her supervisor told her it was probably just dogs. But Jessica was smart enough to take pictures. Smart enough to notice that some of the tracks showed bipedal gait. Smart enough to call me. "Ranger Morrison?" she said when I answered the phone. "My name is Jessica Martinez. I think I need your help." I looked at my calendar and started planning a trip to Colorado, because that's what we do. We help each other. We protect the families who come to our finger, mountains looking for peace and beauty and adventure. And we hunt the things that hunt them. The hungry ones are still out there, in forests and mountains across the country. They're patient, cunning, and utterly without mercy. But they're not invincible. They can be fought. They can be defeated. They just need to meet the right ranger on the right night. My name is Sarah Beth Morrison, and I'm still hunting. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and I've been a forest ranger for 20 years. Folks around Jefferson National Forest call me preacher on account of how I quote scripture when things get rough. Never thought I'd need those verses for what I found in September of '63. The Blue Ridge Mountains hold secrets. After 2 decades walking these trails, I know every logging road, every hidden clearing, every place where the old-timers say strange things happened. But I'm a practical man. Was a detective in Richmond before my Martha got sick, before the doctors said the mountain air might help her lungs. Didn't help much in the end. Been 3 months since we buried her. 3 months of walking these woods alone, carrying her Bible in my shirt pocket and my shotgun on my shoulder. The good Lord knows I've been asking him some hard questions lately. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Coffee at 5, radio check with headquarters, then out to patrol the hunting areas. Season was coming up fast, and we'd been getting reports of folks camping in places they shouldn't. Nothing unusual about that. The call came in around 9. Jim Wilson's hunting party was 3 days overdue from their annual trip to Copper Ridge. His wife was worried sick, said Jim always called home every evening, regular as clockwork. These weren't city folks who'd get lost. Jim and his boys had been hunting these mountains since they were kids. I took the old logging road up to their usual spot. The forest felt different that morning, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The birds weren't singing much, and I hadn't seen a single deer or squirrel. Even the insects seemed quiet. Martha always said, "I noticed things others missed." Guess 20 years in these mountains teaches you to listen. Found their camp easy enough. 4 tents set up neat and proper around a stone fire ring. Trucks parked right where they should be. But no sign of the men. The fire was cold, maybe 2 days. Dead. Coffee pot still on the grate, thick with mold. Their gear was all there, rifles, ammunition, food supplies. Nobody packs out and leaves their guns behind. That's when I started feeling it. You know how sometimes you walk into a room and sense something's wrong, even though everything looks normal? The camp felt like that. Wrong, in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. I called out, voice echoing through the trees. "Jim, Bob, you boys around here?" Nothing but silence. Not even an echo came back. Right sound just seemed to die in the air. Started searching the area in expanding circles. The way we were trained. Found boot prints leading toward Copper Ridge, 4 sets walking together. The tracks looked normal enough, except they just stopped. Right in the middle of a clearing, like the men had vanished into thin air. I radioed headquarters, told them we had missing persons, and I'd need backup for a full search. But something in my gut said this wasn't going to be a regular rescue operation. In 20 years of police work and forest service, I'd developed a sense about these things, and every instinct I had was screaming danger. The temperature was dropping too fast for a September afternoon. The shadows between the trees seemed darker, thicker somehow, and I could swear I heard something moving in the woods, just out of sight, keeping pace with me as I worked a search pattern. I'd grown up hearing the old stories about these mountains, tales of witch trials back in the 1800s, of folks who disappeared and were never found, of places where the darkness never quite lifted. Always figured them for campfire tales, stories to spook the tourists. But standing in that empty camp, feeling those shadows press in around me, I started wondering if maybe there was more truth to the old stories than I'd ever wanted to believe. The sun was setting by the time I had to call off the search for the day. But as I packed up my gear, I made myself a promise. I was going to find Jim Wilson and his boys. Whatever happened to them, whatever was lurking in these shadows, I was going to get to the bottom of it. I just had no idea what I was really getting myself into. The next morning brought fog so thick you could barely see 10 feet. Wasn't natural fog either, too early in the season, and the weather had been clear for weeks. But there I was, driving up the mountain road through soup so dense my headlights barely cut through it. Met Sheriff Coleman at the logging road entrance. Good man, though he'd never worked a case like this. We'd called in state police too, and they were bringing dogs. Professional search and rescue, the whole works. Strange weather we're having, Coleman said, looking up at the white wall surrounding us. Strange everything, I told him. This fog shouldn't be here. The search dogs arrived around 8, 3 German shepherds, all trained for tracking missing persons. But when we got them to the camp, they wouldn't work. Just whined and pulled backward, tails tucked, hair standing up on their necks. The handler, a fellow named Pete Morrison, said he'd never seen anything like it. They're scared, he said, trying to coax his lead dog forward. But scared of what? There's nothing here. That's when we found the first one. I was working the area where the tracks ended when I spotted something white through the fog. Called the others over, and we approached careful-like. At first, we thought it was just fallen logs arranged in some kind of pattern. Then the fog shifted, and we saw what it really was. 4 men, arranged in a perfect circle around an old stone ring I'd never noticed before. They were positioned on their backs, arms spread wide, facing up toward the sky. But it was their faces that made Coleman stumble backward and reach for his radio. No fear there. No pain, just empty. Like something had been sucked right out of them, leaving nothing but shells behind. Jesus Christ, Coleman whispered. Don't take the Lord's name, I said automatically. Then felt foolish. But something about this place made me want to keep things respectful. Jim Wilson was closest to me. Good man, 42 years old, 3 kids at home. His chest had been opened up, cut clean and precise. His heart was missing, so were the other 3 hearts. Bob Stevens, Mike Brady, Carl Patterson, all of them opened up the same way, hearts gone. But here's the thing that really got to me. There was no blood. Not on them, not on the ground, nowhere. We need to call the FBI, Coleman said. This is way beyond anything we can handle. I knelt down next to the stone ring. Old granite blocks, covered with moss and carved symbols I didn't recognize. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, maybe 8 feet across. In the center, the ground was burned black, though there was no smell of fire. Ezra, Coleman's voice was tight. Look at this. He was pointing up at the trees around the clearing. Carved into the bark of every pine and oak, about 8 feet high, were symbols that matched the ones on the stones. Fresh cuts, sap still bleeding. But who could reach that high, and why carve them in a perfect circle around the clearing? Serial killer, Coleman said. Has to be. Some kind of ritual thing. I wanted to agree with him. Serial killer made sense. Human evil I could understand, could fight, but I'd worked enough murder scenes to know what they looked like, and this wasn't it. The FBI showed up that afternoon. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, a sharp woman from the Richmond office who specialized in what they called unusual crimes. She took one look at the scene and ordered it sealed off. How many people have been through here? She asked. Just us and the search team, Coleman said. We were careful. Torres walked the perimeter, taking pictures, making notes. Professional, thorough. But I saw her hesitate when she got to the stone ring, saw her hand move unconsciously to the cross she wore around her neck. Agent Torres, I said, you ever seen anything like this before? She was quiet for a long moment, studying the symbols on the trees. There have been similar cases. Different states, different times, always in remote areas. Always the same arrangement. Same missing hearts, same everything, down to the stone circles and the tree markings. She looked at me with serious eyes. Mr. Blackwood, I need you to understand something. Whoever did this has done it before, many times. And they're not finished. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Jim Wilson's face, about the way the fog had come from nowhere, about those dogs refusing to work. Kept feeling like something was watching my cabin from the tree line. Around midnight, I heard them for the first time. Voices in the woods, speaking words I couldn't understand. Not English, not any language I'd ever heard. Low and rhythmic, like some kind of chanting. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped onto the porch. The chanting stopped immediately, like they knew I was listening. But I could feel them out there, watching, waiting. That's when I pulled out Martha's Bible and read aloud from Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The woods went completely silent. Even the night insects stopped chirping. And in that silence, I heard something else. Footsteps, moving away through the undergrowth. Not the hurried steps of someone caught and running. Slow, deliberate, like they were just leaving. For now, the next 3 days brought more fog and more bodies. First was old Pete Morrison, the dog handler. Found him Thursday morning in his truck, parked on the side of the mountain road. Same condition as the others, chest opened, clean, heart missing, face empty of everything that had made him human. But Pete's truck was locked from the inside. No broken windows, no sign of struggle, like he'd just stopped breathing and someone had reached right through the metal to take what they wanted. Agent Torres called in a full FBI team from Quantico. They set up a command post at the ranger station and brought equipment I'd never seen before. Thermal imaging, electromagnetic field detectors, things that looked more like science fiction than police work. Standard procedure for unusual cases, Torres told me when I asked about the strange gear. But I could see the worry in her eyes. Friday brought another victim. Sarah McKenzie, a local teacher who'd been camping with her church group. Her tent was found empty, sleeping bag still warm, but Sarah was discovered 2 miles away in another stone circle. Different location, same ritual arrangement. The rest of her group hadn't heard a thing. That's when the panic started. Sheriff Coleman issued warnings for all campers to leave the forest immediately. Most folks listened, but some of the local hunters were stubborn. Said no devil worshippers were going to run them off their land. I was getting maybe 2 hours of sleep a night. Every evening brought the chanting closer each time. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement between the trees, shadows that didn't match the moonlight. Twice I found footprints around my cabin, bare feet with toes too long and spread too wide to be human. The FBI profiles said we were dealing with an organized cult. Multiple killers working together, probably living in the area, hiding in plain sight, made sense on paper. But their thermal equipment kept picking up heat signatures that moved too fast, in patterns that didn't match human movement. Their electromagnetic detectors went crazy every time the fog rolled in. Saturday night, everything changed. I was on patrol near Copper Ridge when I heard screaming. Human voices, genuine terror. Grabbed my radio and called for backup, then ran toward the sound. Found them in a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd walked this area 100 times. The Parker family, Tom, Linda, and their 2 kids, Sarah and Michael. They'd been camping illegally, trying to get away from the panic down in town. Tom and Linda were already gone. Arranged in the ritual pattern around another stone circle, hearts missing, but the children were alive, huddled together beside their collapsed tent, staring at something I couldn't see. They're still here, 10-year-old Sarah whispered when she saw me. The shadow people, they're still here. I couldn't see anything unusual, just trees and darkness. But my shotgun was in my hands, and every nerve in my body was screaming danger. Where? I whispered back. 8-year-old Michael pointed toward a grove of pines. There, they're watching. That's when I saw them, not fully visible, more like shapes cut out of the darkness. Human-like, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that hurt to watch. They stood perfectly still between the trees, maybe a dozen of them, just watching us. I raised my shotgun, but before I could fire, they were gone. Not running, not hiding. Just gone, like they'd stepped sideways out of reality. We need to go, I told the kids, right now. But as we started to move, I heard the chanting again. All around us this time, coming from every direction. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The fog rolled in so thick I lost sight of the children, even though they were right beside me. That's when I felt it. Something cold and vast pressing against my mind, not trying to hurt me, not yet. Just looking, studying, like it was deciding whether I was worth its attention. I pulled out Martha's Bible and started reading aloud. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The pressure eased slightly. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." The chanting grew louder, angry now. "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." The fog began to clear. I could see the children again, see the tree line, but I could also see the shapes moving closer, circling us like wolves. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." One of the shadow figures stepped into the clearing. Human-shaped, but definitely not human. Tall as a basketball player, but thin as a scarecrow. Its face was a void, completely black, but somehow I knew it was smiling. "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." It raised one impossibly long arm, pointing directly at me. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Preacher," it said, "we know you." Then it was gone. All of them were gone. The fog lifted, the temperature returned to normal, and we were alone with the dead. But I knew they'd be back. And, next time, scripture might not be enough. The FBI team pulled out Sunday morning. Not officially, they called it a strategic repositioning, but I knew the truth. Their equipment had been going haywire for 3 days, their thermal cameras showing impossible readings, their field agents reporting shared nightmares about shadow figures and ritual murders. Agent Torres found me at the ranger station before they left. "This isn't over," she said. "Whatever's happening here, it's beyond federal jurisdiction, beyond any kind of jurisdiction. You believe me now? About what I saw?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains. "I've worked unusual cases for 12 years. Seen things that don't make it into the official reports. But this," she shook her head, "just be careful, Ezra. Whatever you're dealing with, it's been here a long time, longer than any of us." That evening, I made a decision. The shadow people knew who I was, had called me by name. This thing, whatever it was, had made it personal. And if the FBI couldn't handle it, if the regular law couldn't touch it, then maybe it was time to fight it on different terms. I loaded my shotgun with blessed shells. Father Murphy down in Lynchburg had consecrated them for me, though he thought I'd lost my mind. Filled my pockets with holy water, put Martha's Bible in my shirt, and headed up to Copper Ridge. Time to end this. The fog was waiting for me, thicker than ever, but I knew my way now, could feel where they wanted me to go. The shadows between the trees were wrong, darker than night should be. But I pressed forward anyway. Found them in the same clearing where the Parker family died. But this time, I wasn't looking at a crime scene. I was looking at a ceremony. 20 figures stood around the stone circle, and these weren't shadows anymore. They looked human in the fog, normal people I might pass on the street. But when the moonlight hit them right, I could see what they really were. Things wearing human faces like masks, standing too straight, breathing too slowly. In the center of the circle stood their leader, tall man in a black suit, perfectly normal except for his eyes. No pupils, no color, just empty black holes that seemed to go on forever. "Welcome, preacher," he said in that wind through dead leaves voice. "We've been waiting for you." "I know what you are," I said, raising my shotgun. "I know what you want." He smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "Do you?" "We are old, Ezra Blackwood. Older than your forest, older than your mountains. We were here when the first humans learned to fear the dark. You're demons. We are hunger. We are shadow. We are the space between what is and what could be." He gestured to the stone circle. "And tonight, we finish what we began." That's when I saw them. Tom and Linda Parker, standing among the other figures. But not as I'd found them. Alive, walking, breathing, but empty, just like the others. "Your wife sends her regards," the leader said. Martha stepped out from behind one of the stones, my Martha, looking exactly as she had the day we buried her. Beautiful, healthy, smiling at me with love in her eyes. "Hello, Ezra," she said in her sweet voice. "I've missed you so much." My hands shook. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy. "She's not real," I whispered. "Isn't she?" The leader's smile grew wider. "We can make her real. Flesh and blood, warm to the touch. All you have to do is join us. Feed the hunger. Help us open the door. What door? He gestured to the stone circle, and I saw it now. The space inside the stones wasn't ground anymore. It was darkness, infinite darkness that seemed to move and breathe. A hole in the world, the door between shadows and flesh, between your world and ours. Feed it enough souls, and it opens forever. No more hiding, no more hunting, one at a time. Everything becomes shadow. Martha took a step toward me. Please, Ezra, I'm so lonely. I'm so cold. I wanted to believe it. God help me. I wanted to drop my weapon and run to her, hold her, pretend the last 3 months had been a nightmare. But then I remembered something she'd said to me, lying in that hospital bed, weak from the cancer but still my Martha. If something ever happens to me, you remember what I taught you. Faith isn't believing when it's easy. Faith is believing when it's impossible. I raised the shotgun and pointed it at the thing wearing my wife's face. You're not Martha. Its smile faltered. Ezra, Martha is with the Lord. You're just wearing her like a costume. The thing's face began to change, becoming something twisted and hungry. Then you choose death. I choose faith. The shadow figures rushed me all at once. I fired the blessed shells, and where they hit, the darkness screamed and burned. Holy water flew from my pockets as I spun and dodged, creating barriers of light that made the creatures howl. But there were too many of them, and they were fast. Impossibly fast. One caught me across the chest with claws like razors. Another grabbed my leg, pulling me toward the stone circle, toward that hole in reality. I could feel the hunger emanating from it, wanting to swallow me whole. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I gasped, fighting to stay conscious. The leader laughed. Your God is not here, preacher. I will fear no evil, I continued, clutching Martha's Bible. For thou art with me. Light erupted from the pages. Not electric light, not fire. Something else. Something that made the shadows shriek and retreat. The Bible grew warm in my hands, then hot, then blazing with power that didn't burn. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The leader staggered backward, his perfect human mask melting away to reveal the void beneath. Impossible. We killed her. We gave her the cancer. We made you doubt. We broke your faith. You surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I shouted, standing up, the light growing brighter, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The hole in the stone circle began to collapse. The shadow figures were dissolving, returning to whatever place they'd come from, and the leader was screaming as his form broke apart. This isn't over, his voice echoed as he faded. We are eternal. We will return. Maybe, I said, still holding the blazing Bible, but not today. The clearing fell silent, the fog lifted, and I was alone with the real bodies of Tom and Linda Parker, finally at peace. The official report listed the deaths as the work of an unknown serial killer who fled the area. 5 victims, no suspects, case closed for lack of evidence. Agent Torres made sure certain details never made it into the files: the electromagnetic readings, the impossible thermal signatures, the shared nightmares among her team. Some truths are too dangerous, she told me when she came back a month later to check on things. But that doesn't make them less true. I kept Martha's Bible. Still carry it with me on every patrol, though it looks normal now, just worn leather and thin pages. But sometimes, when the shadows grow too deep or the forest gets too quiet, I can feel that warmth waiting inside it, ready when needed. The stone circles are still there. I check on them regularly, make sure they stay empty, make sure nothing's trying to crawl back through. So far, they're just old granite and moss. But I know what's lurking on the other side, patient and hungry, waiting for another chance. Found out later that the circles go way back. Local historical society had records of witch trials in the 1800s of people who disappeared near those exact spots. Every few decades, somebody would vanish or turn up dead in ways that didn't make sense. The shadow people had been feeding slowly, carefully, for more than a century. Until they got greedy. Until they decided it was time to open the door permanently. Sheriff Coleman retired early. Moved to Florida, said the mountains didn't agree with him anymore. Can't say I blame him. Some folks aren't meant to know what's really lurking in the dark places. But somebody has to know. Somebody has to watch. I've trained 3 younger rangers in what to look for. Taught them about the signs, unusual fog, animals acting scared, cold spots that don't belong. Showed them the old symbols carved in the trees, told them what those stone circles really are. They think I'm half crazy, but they listen, and they carry blessed ammunition now, just in case. The Parker children grew up normal, mostly. Sarah became a teacher, like her aunt, moved to California. Michael joined the army, says he wants to protect people from bad things. Neither of them remembers much about that night in the woods, and that's probably for the best. Some memories are too heavy for kids to carry, but they both call me on September nights when the moon is dark. Just to check in, they say. Just to hear a familiar voice. I never married again. Sometimes I think about it, but the shadow people showed me something that night. Showed me how easily they could use love as a weapon, how they could twist the best parts of a person's heart into chains. Besides, I've got work to do. The forests of Virginia are vast, full of old places where the darkness runs deep. And I'm not the only ranger who started noticing strange things. Stories are spreading quietly among folks who work in wild places, hikers who vanish and reappear with no memory of where they've been, campers who report voices speaking impossible languages in the night. The shadow people aren't gone, just scattered, hiding, waiting for their next chance to feed. But now there are people watching for them, people who know what signs to look for, people who carry light into dark places. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and I've been fighting shadows for 20 years now. Some battles you win, some you just survive. But the important thing is to keep fighting, keep watching, keep the faith. Because the darkness between the trees is real, and it's always hungry. But so is the light. And as long as good people are willing to carry that light into dark places, the shadows will never win completely. They'll keep trying, keep hunting, keep whispering their promises of easy power and false resurrections. But they'll never stop me from walking through the valley of the shadow of death without fear. Because I am not walking alone. My name is Isabella Ravencrest, but everyone calls me Izzy. I've been a park ranger here in George Washington National Forest for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, drug labs hidden in the woods. But nothing prepared me for what happened at Raven's Cliff that summer. It was June 1992, and I was running my first summer camp for at-risk kids. The program was my baby, something I'd fought the Park Service to approve for 3 years. See, before I became a ranger, I was a psychologist. I knew these troubled teenagers needed more than just fresh air and hiking trails. They needed to feel like they belonged somewhere. My supervisor thought I was crazy. "You want to take gang kids and runaways camping?" he'd said. "What happens when they steal everything and run off into the woods?" But I knew better. My Cherokee grandmother always said the mountains could heal what was broken inside people. And I was broken too, though I didn't tell anyone that. I'd come to these mountains 8 years ago to escape an ex-husband who thought his fists were good ways to win arguments. The isolation was supposed to protect me, keep me safe. The camp was small, just 12 kids between 13 and 16 years old. Most came from the streets of Richmond and D.C. Kids like Jason Martinez, who'd been caught selling drugs to pay for his sick mother's medicine. And Amy Chen, who'd run away from foster care so many times the state was ready to give up on her. Then there was my niece, Sarah. My sister died in a car accident 6 months ago, and suddenly I had a 15-year-old girl who blamed me for not saving her mom. Sarah was angry at the world, angry at me, angry at God. I hoped this camp might help us both heal. Raven's Cliff was our main destination for hiking. It's this massive 400-foot waterfall that drops into a gorge so deep you can't see the bottom. The Cherokee called it a sacred place, but the white settlers renamed it after all the ravens that nest in the cliff walls. The birds make this eerie cawing sound that echoes off the rocks. The trail to the cliff is dangerous, narrow paths with steep drops on one side. But the kids loved it. There's something about standing at the edge of that waterfall that makes you feel alive and terrified at the same time. That first week went better than I'd hoped. The kids were starting to trust me, trust each other. Even Sarah was beginning to smile again. We'd set up camp about a half-mile from the cliff, in a clearing surrounded by thick pine woods, but things started feeling wrong on Thursday morning. I woke up to complete silence. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped. In 8 years of camping, I'd never experienced anything like it. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. The kids noticed too. "Miss Izzy," Jason whispered as we ate breakfast around the fire. "Why is everything so quiet?" I didn't have an answer. I checked my radio, but it was just static. No contact with the ranger station 20 miles away. I told myself it was just atmospheric interference from the storm clouds building on the horizon. That's when Amy pointed toward the cliff. "Who's that lady?" We all looked. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure in white standing at the edge of the waterfall. Tall, thin, with long dark hair whipping in a wind we couldn't feel down in our camp. "I don't see anyone," I said, squinting through the morning mist. But my heart was racing. Something about that distant figure felt wrong. Dangerous. By the time I grabbed my binoculars, whatever I'd seen was gone. The storm hit that afternoon like God himself was angry. Rain pounded our tents so hard, we couldn't hear each other talk. Lightning turned the sky white every few seconds, and thunder shook the ground under our feet. We all crowded into the main tent, a big canvas shelter I used for group activities. The kids were scared but trying not to show it. These were tough kids who'd survived things most adults couldn't imagine. But there's something about being trapped in a storm in the middle of the wilderness that strips away all your street smarts. "Tell us a story, Miss Izzy," Amy said, hugging her knees to her chest. I was about to start some silly tale about talking animals when Sarah spoke up. "Tell us about the crying lady." My blood went cold. "What crying lady?" "The one I heard last night, outside my tent. She was crying and calling someone's name. Sounded like Marcus's or Maria or something." The other kids perked up. Several nodded like they'd heard something too. "It was probably just the wind," I said, but even I didn't believe that. Jason shook his head. "No, Miss Izzy, I heard it too. A woman crying, somewhere near the cliff, like she lost something really important." The storm finally passed. Around midnight, I made everyone stay in the main tent until morning, but I barely slept. Every time the wind died down, I thought I heard it too. A woman's voice, faint and heartbroken, calling into the darkness. When dawn came, I did a head count. Everyone was accounted for. I told myself I was being paranoid, letting the kids' imagination get to me. We spent the morning doing camp activities, basic wilderness survival, plant identification, that sort of thing. I was trying to keep everyone busy, keep their minds off the strange sounds from the night before. But around lunchtime, Jason asked if we could hike to the cliff. "I want to see where that lady was crying from," he said. Every instinct told me to say no, but these kids had trusted me enough to come out here. I couldn't let my own fears ruin their experience. "Okay," I said, "but we all stay together. No one wanders off." The trail to Raven's Cliff winds through thick forest before opening up to the rocky, a ledge overlooking the gorge. It's always been one of my favorite spots. You can see for miles across the Shenandoah Valley. But that day, something felt different. Wrong. The air was too thick, too quiet, and cold despite the June heat. We were about halfway to the cliff when Amy screamed. She was pointing at a tree just off the trail. Hanging from one of the branches, about 8 feet off the ground, was a child's backpack, a small pink one with cartoon characters on it. "That wasn't there yesterday," I said, more to myself than the kids. Jason, being Jason, decided to climb the tree and get it down before I could stop him. He was always doing stuff like that, taking risks to prove he wasn't afraid of anything. The backpack was empty, except for a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, my hands started shaking. It was a child's drawing. Stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. At the bottom, in crayon letters, someone had written, "Mommy and me." But the paper looked old. Really old. The edges were yellow and cracked, like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. "Miss Izzy?" Amy's voice was small. "How did that get up there?" I didn't answer because I didn't have one. No one could have climbed that tree carrying a backpack. The lowest branches were too high, and the bark was smooth with no handholds. We kept hiking, but the mood had changed. The kids stayed close together, whispering among themselves. Even the tough ones looked nervous. When we reached the cliff, everything seemed normal at first. The waterfall thundered down into the misty gorge. Ravens circled overhead, riding the updrafts. It was beautiful and peaceful, just like always. Then Jason walked too close to the edge. Whoa! He stumbled backward, his face pale. Did you guys hear that? Hear what? I asked, moving toward him. Someone calling my name. From down in the gorge? I looked over the edge, nothing but mist and rocks 400 feet down. Jason, there's no one down there. But as soon as I said it, we all heard it. A woman's voice, faint but clear, drifting up from the depths of the gorge. Jason, Jason, come to Mama. The voice was sad and desperate, like a mother who'd lost her child. But there was something else in it. Something hungry. Amy grabbed my arm. Miss Izzy, I want to go back to camp, right now. For once, I completely agreed with her. We practically ran back down the trail, none of us speaking until we reached the safety of our tents. That evening, as we sat around the fire, I tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was an echo from somewhere else. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe we were all just spooked from being in the woods. But deep down, I knew we'd heard something that shouldn't exist. Something that wanted to lure children to that cliff. I should have packed up the camp right then. Should have loaded all those kids into the van and driven back to civilization. Instead, I told myself one more day wouldn't hurt. That we were all just letting our imaginations run wild. I've regretted that decision every day since. I woke up at 3 a.m. to Sarah shaking my shoulder. Aunt Izzy, she whispered, Jason's gone. My blood turned to ice water. I grabbed my flashlight and crawled out of the tent. Sarah was right. Jason's sleeping bag was empty, his boots missing from outside his tent. How long has he been gone? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know. Amy heard someone walking around outside maybe an hour ago. She thought it was you checking on everyone. We searched the entire camp. No Jason. His backpack was still in his tent, along with his jacket. He'd left wearing only his pajamas and boots. I got on the radio and called for help, but all I got was static. The storm must have knocked out the relay tower. What do we do, Miss Izzy? Amy asked. She was trying to be brave, but I could hear the fear in her voice. We find him, I said, though my stomach was churning with dread. I left Amy in charge of the other kids with strict orders not to leave the camp. Then Sarah and I set out with our flashlights, following the only trail Jason would know, the path to Raven's Cliff. The forest felt alive with watching eyes. Every shadow could hide something dangerous. Every sound made us jump. But we pressed on, calling Jason's name into the darkness. We were about halfway to the cliff when Sarah grabbed my arm. Listen, she whispered. In the distance, we could hear crying. A woman's voice, heartbroken and desperate. But this time, we could make out the words. Jason, my sweet boy, come to Mama. Don't be afraid. The voice was coming from the direction of the cliff. Oh God, I breathed. She's got him. We ran. Branches tore at our clothes and rocks tried to trip us, but we didn't slow down. That voice kept calling, getting clearer as we got closer to the gorge. When we reached the cliff, my flashlight beam found Jason immediately. He was standing at the very edge of the waterfall, his arms hanging limp at his sides. His eyes were open but unfocused, like he was sleepwalking. Just behind him, barely visible in the mist, stood a figure in white. She was tall and thin, with long black hair that moved in a wind I couldn't feel. Her dress looked like it had once been beautiful, but now it was torn and stained. When she turned toward us, I saw her face. Or what was left of it. Her features were blurred, like someone had smeared wet paint. But her eyes were holes of absolute grief, the kind of sadness that could swallow the world. Jason, I screamed, get away from the edge. But he didn't respond. He took another step forward, his toes now hanging over empty air. The woman in white looked at me and spoke. Her voice was like wind through broken glass. He will be safe with me. They all will be. I lost my own children so long ago. Please, I begged, he's just a boy. He doesn't belong to you. They all belong to me now, she said. I am their mother. I will keep them safe from the cruel world. Jason took another step. Another inch, and he'd fall 400 feet to the rocks below. That's when Sarah did something incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. She ran forward and tackled Jason, knocking both of them away from the edge. The woman in white let out a shriek that made the rocks shake. She flew at us, actually flew, her feet never touching the ground. Sarah and Jason rolled away just as ghostly hands swiped through the air where they'd been. "Run!" I yelled. We dragged Jason between us. He was conscious now, but dazed, like he was waking up from a deep dream. Behind us, that horrible shrieking continued, along with the sound of something crashing through the trees. We made it back to camp, just as the sun was rising. The other kids surrounded us, all talking at once, asking what happened. Jason couldn't remember anything after going to bed. But I knew we weren't safe. Whatever that thing was, she wasn't going to give up. She wanted our children, and she'd keep trying until she got them. I should have evacuated the camp immediately. But the radio was still dead, and the nearest road was 20 miles through dangerous terrain. Taking 12 scared kids on a forced march through the wilderness seemed just as risky as staying put. So I made another mistake. I decided we'd wait until morning, then hike out as a group. I posted guards that day, kids working in pairs, keeping watch while the others rested. Everyone stayed close to camp. No one went anywhere alone. But the woman in white was getting bolder. Around noon, Amy saw her standing in the tree line, just watching our camp. When Amy pointed her out to me, the figure vanished like smoke. An hour later, she was closer. Standing, right at the edge of the clearing, her arms reaching toward us like she was inviting the children to come to her. "Don't look at her," I told the kids. "Don't listen if she calls your names." But it was hard advice to follow. There was something hypnotic about her presence, something that made you want to walk toward her, even though every rational thought screamed danger. That afternoon, I found Amy sitting on a log, staring into space. "Amy?" I waved my hand in front of her face. "Amy, can you hear me?" She blinked slowly, like she was waking up. "She's so sad, Miss Izzy. She just wants her children back." "Amy, listen to me. She's not human. She's something else, something dangerous." But Amy wasn't really listening. None of the kids were. They all had that same distant look in their eyes, like they were hearing something I couldn't. As the sun set, I realized we weren't going to make it through another night. The woman in white was calling to them, and they were starting to answer. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in the middle of camp with my back to the fire, watching the kids in their sleeping bags. Every few minutes, one of them would stir, like they were hearing something in their dreams. Around midnight, Amy got up. I watched her unzip her tent and step outside, moving like a sleepwalker. Her eyes were open but blank, focused on something I couldn't see. "Amy," I whispered, but she didn't respond. She started walking toward the tree line, toward a figure in white that stood just beyond the firelight. The woman was clearer now, more solid, and she was beautiful in a terrible way, like a statue of perfect grief carved from moonlight. I followed Amy, staying just close enough to grab her if needed. Behind me, I heard other tent zippers opening, more kids getting up, drawn by whatever call I couldn't hear. The woman in white led us through the forest, never quite solid enough to touch but real enough to follow. The children walked behind her like she was the Pied Piper, their faces peaceful and empty. We ended up at Raven's Cliff, standing at the edge of the gorge. The waterfall thundered beside us, mist rising from the depths like ghostly fingers. That's when the woman finally spoke to me directly. "You have Cherokee blood," she said, her voice like wind through fallen leaves. "You understand loss." And suddenly, I did understand. Images flooded my mind, not my memories, but hers. I saw her as she once was, a young Cherokee mother traveling the Trail of Tears with her 3 children. I felt her desperation as soldiers forced them from their home, her terror as disease and hunger stalked the forced march west. I saw her children dying one by one, first the baby, then her daughter, then her oldest son. I felt her heart breaking as she held their small bodies, knowing she'd failed to protect them. And I saw her final choice, home I'll be, standing at this same cliff 150 years ago, deciding that death was better than living with such loss. "They took my children," she whispered, "but I can have these children. I can keep them safe forever." Safe? I stepped forward. You want to kill them. Death is not the end, she said. They will live with me in the spirit world. No hunger, no pain, no sorrow, only love. The kids were walking toward the edge of the cliff. Amy was in front, her face serene. Behind her came Jason, then Sarah, then all the others. Stop, I yelled, but they didn't hear me. They were in her world now, not mine. I had maybe 30 seconds before Amy stepped off the cliff. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran straight at the woman in white. My hands passed right through her, but the contact sent a shock through both of us. Suddenly, I could see everything. Her memories, her pain, her 150 years of wandering these mountains, stealing children to replace the ones she'd lost. But she could see my memories, too. My sister's death. The guilt I carried. The way I blamed myself for not being there when she needed me. You understand, she said. You know what it means to lose family. I do, I admitted. But taking other people's children won't bring yours back. They were innocents, she said, her voice breaking. My babies did nothing wrong. Why did they have to die? I felt tears on my face. I don't know. Sometimes horrible things happen to people who don't deserve them. But stealing other children won't fix that. Then what will? She demanded. How do I stop the pain? That's when I realized what she really needed. Not replacement children, not revenge against the world that had hurt her. She needed to let go. Come with me, I said, holding out my hand. Let me help you find them. Her eyes widened. Find them? Your real children. They're waiting for you, aren't they? On the other side? She hesitated. But what if they blame me? What if they hate me for failing them? They don't, I said with absolute certainty. They love you. They want to see you again. But not like this. Not as something that hurts other families. I saw the change in her face. The terrible hunger faded, replaced by hope. She looked at the children standing at the cliff's edge, and for the first time, I saw her clearly, not as a monster, but as a broken mother who'd lost everything. Let them go, I said gently. Let yourself go. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, the children were blinking in confusion, stepping back from the cliff edge. I can see them, she whispered. My babies, they're here. The air around her began to glow with soft light. I saw 3 small figures materialize beside her, a baby, a little girl, and a boy about Jason's age. They reached for their mother with arms full of love and forgiveness. Thank you, she said to me. Then she looked at the children one last time. Be safe, little ones. Be loved. The light grew brighter, and then they were gone, all of them. The broken mother and her lost children, finally reunited. The kids didn't remember much about that night. They knew something strange had happened, but the details were fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream. Jason thought he'd gone sleepwalking. Amy remembered feeling very sad about something, but couldn't say what. Sarah hugged me tight and said she was glad we were both okay. We hiked out the next morning without any more trouble. The forest felt normal again, birds singing, insects buzzing, wind rustling through the leaves. The radio worked perfectly, and my supervisor was relieved when I called in to report everyone safe. I filed a report about Jason's sleepwalking incident and recommended the camp area be checked for safety hazards. I didn't mention the woman in white. Who would have believed me? The kids went back to their lives in the city, but something had changed in all of them. They stayed in touch with each other and with me. Amy started volunteering at a children's hospital. Jason became an advocate for missing kids. Sarah and I grew closer than we'd ever been. As for me, I stayed in the forest, but I also started learning more about my Cherokee heritage. I reached out to tribal elders, learned about ceremonies and traditions my grandmother had tried to teach me before she died. I discovered that what happened at Raven's Cliff wasn't unique. There were stories of lost spirits throughout Cherokee history, people who died in trauma and gotten stuck between worlds. Most were harmless, just lonely. But some, like the woman at the cliff, could become dangerous if their pain wasn't healed. I started working with the tribal council to identify and help these spirits. It became an unofficial part of my ranger duties, be spiritual counseling for the dead. Raven's Cliff is still a popular hiking destination. Families come there every year to see the waterfall and enjoy the view. Most never experience anything unusual, but sometimes On quiet mornings, when the mist rises from the gorge, visitors report seeing a figure in white standing at the cliff's edge. She doesn't try to harm anyone now. She just stands there for a moment, like she's watching over the children who come to visit. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear her singing, not the desperate wailing that once echoed through these mountains, but a gentle lullaby, the kind a mother sings to help her children sleep peacefully. I think she's finally found her peace. But I also think she'll always be there, in some way, protecting the cliff that was once a place of sorrow, making sure no other children are lost to the darkness that nearly claimed her. Because that's what mothers do, whether they're alive or dead. They protect their young, even when those children aren't their own. Asterisk. Based on a true account by Isabella Ravencrest, retired park ranger, George Washington National Forest. Miss Ravencrest now works as a cultural liaison between the National Park Service and regional Cherokee communities. Asterisk. My name is Gabriel Nightwalker, but everyone calls me Gabe. I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Ice storms that could kill you in minutes, rock slides that came out of nowhere, bears that forgot they were supposed to be sleeping through winter. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in February, when the phone rang in my cabin. The voice on the other end belonged to Sarah from dispatch, and she sounded worried. "Gabe, we've got a problem. That research team studying acid rain up on the summit, they missed their check-in last night." I set down my coffee mug and looked out the window. Snow was falling hard, and the wind was howling like something wild and angry. How long overdue? 12 hours. Their emergency beacon went quiet around 8 p.m. That wasn't good. Dr. Patricia Vance and her team were supposed to call in every 6 hours during their week-long study. They were experienced mountain researchers, not tourists who might forget the rules. "I'll head up there," I said, already reaching for my gear. "Gabe, the Weather Service is calling for the worst blizzard in 20 years. Maybe we should wait." No. The word came out harder than I meant it to. If they're hurt, waiting could kill them. I hung up and started packing. Climbing rope, emergency shelter, medical supplies, flare gun. My hands shook a little as I worked. They'd been shaking a lot lately, especially in the mornings. Ever since Dave died 3 months ago, Dave Morrison had been my climbing partner for 10 years. We'd rescued dozens of people together on these peaks. Then one day, he went up alone to check some weather equipment and never came back. They found his body at the bottom of a cliff that he could have climbed with his eyes closed. The official report said he slipped on ice. I knew better. Dave didn't slip. Ever. I'd been drinking more since then. Not enough to lose my job, but enough to sleep without dreaming about finding his broken body in the snow. Enough to stop asking questions about how an expert climber falls off an easy route. Outside, my snowmobile started on the 3rd try. The machine bucked and fought against the wind as I rode up the mountain trail toward the summit. The temperature was dropping fast. My breath came out in white clouds that froze before they could drift away. Mount Mitchell is the highest peak east of the Mississippi River, standing 6,684 feet above sea level. In winter, it might as well be the North Pole. The Cherokee called it the place where the wind goes to die, though my grandfather had told me darker stories. Stories about hungry spirits that lived in the high places, feeding on anyone foolish enough to climb too far from the warmth of the valley. I'd laughed at those stories when I was young. Now, riding through snow that stung my face like tiny needles, they didn't seem so funny. The research team's base camp was supposed to be at the weather station, about half a mile below the summit. When I got there, I found their tents still standing but empty. No signs of a struggle. No blood in the snow. Their equipment was neatly arranged, like they'd just stepped out for a walk and planned to come right back. But the footprints in the snow told a different story. Most of the tracks were normal boot prints from 4 different people heading toward the summit trail. But mixed in with them were others. Bigger prints. Much bigger. They looked almost human, but the distance between each step was impossible. 15, maybe 20 feet apart, like whatever made them was either jumping with each step or was tall enough to cover that much ground walking normally. I knelt down beside one of the strange tracks. It was deep, pressed into the frozen ground like it had been made by something incredibly heavy. The shape was wrong too, longer than a human foot, with what looked like claw marks at the front. A gust of wind hit me so hard I almost fell over. For just a second, I could have sworn I heard something in that wind. Not the usual whistle and howl, but something that sounded almost like words. Like voices calling from very far away. I stood up fast, my hand automatically going to the radio on my belt. "Base, this is Ranger Nightwalker. I'm at the research camp. No sign of the team, but I've got their trail. Heading to the summit now." Static crackled back at me. Then Sarah's voice, faint and broken up by interference. "Gabe, storm getting worse. Might lose contact." The radio went dead. I was on my own now, just like I'd been when I found Dave's body. Just like I'd been every day since, drinking myself to sleep and waking up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. But this time felt different. This time, the mountain itself felt wrong. I followed the trail of impossible footprints up toward the summit, and, with each step, the temperature seemed to drop another degree. My breath came out in thick white clouds that hung in the air longer than they should have. The snow crunched under my boots with a sound like breaking bones. Somewhere above me, hidden in the swirling white darkness, something was waiting. And I was walking right toward it. The trail to Mount Mitchell's summit is normally a 2-hour hike in good weather. In the middle of a blizzard, it should have taken me 4 hours at least. But the strange footprints led me along shortcuts I'd never seen before, paths that cut straight up the mountainside like stairs built for giants. I'd been climbing for an hour when I found the first piece of equipment. Dr. Vance's GPS unit was stuck in a tree branch about 12 feet off the ground. Not dropped or thrown, but placed there carefully, like someone had wanted me to find it. The screen was cracked, but when I turned it on, it showed the team's last recorded position, still moving upward toward the summit at 11:47 p.m. That was impossible. No sane person climbs Mount Mitchell in the middle of the night during a blizzard. I tucked the GPS into my pack and kept following the trail. The wind was getting stronger, and the cold was starting to bite through my winter gear. My thermometer read -15 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt much colder. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your bones feel brittle. 20 minutes later, I found the second piece of evidence. A piece of bright orange fabric was wrapped around a tree trunk like a ribbon. I recognized it immediately. It was from Dr. Kim's jacket. But the fabric wasn't torn or ripped. It had been cut cleanly and tied in place with careful, deliberate knots. Someone or something was leaving me a trail to follow. The thought made my stomach clench with fear, but I kept climbing. 4 people were missing, and I was their only hope of rescue. Even if that rescue was starting to feel more like walking into a trap. The higher I climbed, the weirder things got. Trees were broken off at strange heights, not snapped by wind or weighted down with snow, but twisted off cleanly about 15 feet up, like something enormous had grabbed them and pulled. The remaining stumps were smooth, as if they'd been polished, and the footprints kept getting deeper. By the time I reached the final approach to the summit, each print was pressed so deep into the frozen ground that I could see dirt beneath the snow. Whatever was making them had to weigh hundreds of pounds and move without making any sound at all. The summit of Mount Mitchell is mostly bare rock with a few scattered trees and the weather station building. In clear weather, you can see for miles in every direction. Today, I could barely see 10 feet through the swirling snow. But I could see the weather station, and something was very wrong with it. The building looked normal. From the outside, a small concrete structure designed to withstand the worst mountain weather. But the snow around it was wrong. Instead of the random patterns left by wind, it was arranged in perfect circles, like something had been walking around and around the building for hours. I approached carefully, my hand on the flare gun in my belt. The door was standing open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, I could see the research team's equipment scattered across the floor. I stepped through the doorway and immediately wanted to step back out. The temperature inside the building was colder than outside. Much colder. My breath came out in thick white clouds that didn't drift away but hung in the air like fog. Frost covered every surface, including some that shouldn't have been able to freeze. Dr. Vance's laptop was open on the floor, its screen cracked but still glowing. I knelt down and looked at the last entry in her research log, *11:52 p.m. C. Something is wrong with the weather patterns. Temperature dropping impossibly fast. Wind sounds like voices. Dr. Kim thinks he saw something moving outside, something too tall to be human. Going to investigate. If anyone finds this, don't come looking for us. Get off the mountain. Get off the mountain now. Asterisk. The entry ended there. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the wind. That's when I noticed the photographs. They were scattered across the floor, like someone had thrown them dozens of pictures from the research team's work. Most showed normal mountain scenes, trees, rocks, snow measurements. But 3 of them were different. The first showed Dr. Kim standing beside their equipment, smiling at the camera. But in the background, barely visible between the trees, was a shadow that didn't match anything else in the picture. A tall, thin shadow that seemed to stretch up toward the sky. The second photo showed the same scene from a different angle. The shadow was gone, but now there were those impossible footprints in the snow behind Dr. Kim. He was still smiling, completely unaware of what had been standing right behind him. The third photo made my blood turn to ice water. It was taken inside the weather station, probably the same night they disappeared. The team was gathered around their equipment, working by lamplight, but reflected in the window behind them was a face. A huge, pale face with eyes like black holes and what looked like antlers growing from its forehead. And it was looking right at the camera. I dropped the photograph and backed toward the door. That's when I heard it, a sound that made every muscle in my body freeze with terror. Footsteps in the snow outside. But not normal footsteps. These were slow and deliberate, with that same impossible spacing I'd been following all day. Each step landed with a soft thud that I could feel through the floor of the building. Asterisk thud. Asterisk. 20 seconds of silence. Asterisk thud. Asterisk another 20 seconds. Asterisk thud. Asterisk. Something was circling the weather station, just like those patterns in the snow suggested. Something big enough to leave tracks 15 feet apart. Something that had taken 4 experienced researchers without leaving any signs of a struggle. I pulled out my flare gun and tried to control my breathing. The footsteps were getting closer to the door. That's when I heard Dr. Vance's voice. "Help me." It came from somewhere outside, weak and desperate. Exactly what you'd expect to hear from someone who'd been trapped in a blizzard for almost 24 hours. Except I'd seen her photograph. I'd read her last log entry. And I was pretty sure Dr. Patricia Vance was already dead. "Help me, please. I'm so cold." The voice came again, closer this time, just outside the door. I raised the flare gun and pointed it toward the entrance, my hands shaking from more than just the cold. Every instinct I had as a ranger was screaming at me to go help whoever was out there. But every instinct I had as Dave Morrison's climbing partner was telling me to run. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. "Gabe?" "Doctor," Vance's voice called softly. "Gabe Nightwalker? I know you're in there. Please help me. I'm hurt." I'd never told the research team my first name. The voice calling my name from outside the weather station was definitely Dr. Patricia Vance. I'd spoken with her on the radio dozens of times over the past week. Same tone, same slight accent from her years studying in Colorado. Same way of pronouncing my name with a little pause between the 2 parts. But Dr. Vance had never heard my first name before. I was just Ranger Nightwalker on all our radio calls. "Gabe, please. I can't feel my hands anymore." I kept the flare gun pointed at the door and didn't answer. The smart thing would have been to find another way out of the building, but the weather station only had one door. If I wanted to leave, I had to go past whatever was out there pretending to be Dr. Vance. "I know you're in there, Gabe. I can hear you breathing." The voice was getting impatient now, less desperate and more demanding. And underneath Dr. Vance's familiar tone, I could hear something else, a low rumbling sound, like a hungry stomach. "Your grandfather told you about us, didn't he?" The voice changed, becoming deeper and more resonant. "The hungry ones who live in high places, the wind eaters. You should have listened to those stories, little ranger." My blood turned to ice. My Cherokee grandfather had died when I was 12 years old. His stories about mountain spirits were family secrets, never shared with outsiders. Whatever was out there, it knew things about me that no research scientist from Colorado could possibly know. "We've been waiting for you, Gabe. Ever since we took your climbing friend." I almost pulled the trigger right then. The mention of Dave hit me like a physical blow, confirming what I'd suspected for months. Dave hadn't slipped and fallen. He'd been murdered by whatever was standing outside this building. Dave called your name at the end, the voice continued, and now it sounded like Dave himself. Same gravelly tone, same way of stretching out vowels. He called for his partner to save him. But you weren't there, were you? You were in town, drinking away your problems while your best friend died alone on the mountain. Shut up, I whispered, but my voice cracked. He's with us now. They're all with us. Cold and quiet and perfectly preserved. Would you like to see him? The footsteps started again, but this time they were moving away from the building. Against every rational thought in my head, I found myself following the sound to the window. Outside in the swirling snow, I could barely make out a figure walking away from the weather station. It was tall, impossibly tall, but it moved with Dave Morrison's distinctive limp. The same limp he'd gotten from a climbing accident 5 years ago. Dave? I called out before I could stop myself. The figure stopped and turned around. Even through the snow and wind, I could see his face clearly. It was Dave, exactly as he'd looked the last time I saw him alive. Same beard, same crooked smile, same bright blue eyes. Except his skin was pale, blue-white, like he'd been frozen solid, and his smile was too wide, showing teeth that were too sharp. "Come outside, Gabe," he said in Dave's voice. "It's not so bad once you stop fighting it. The cold becomes warm. The hunger becomes satisfaction. And you never have to feel guilty about letting your friends die ever again." I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't Dave. Dave was dead. This was something else wearing his face, trying to trick me into leaving the safety of the building. But part of me wanted to go anyway. Part of me wanted to walk out, into the snow, and accept whatever punishment this thing had planned for me. Because Dave was right about one thing: I had let my friend die. I'd been drinking in a bar while he was fighting for his life on this mountain. The guilt is eating you alive, isn't it? The Dave thing pressed its face against the window, breath fogging the glass even though its skin looked frozen solid. We can take that away. We can take all the pain away. You just have to come outside. I forced myself to look away from the window and focus on the research equipment scattered around the weather station. There had to be something here that could help me understand what I was dealing with. Some clue about how to fight it. Dr. Vance's laptop was still running, powered by a portable battery pack. I scrolled through her research files, looking for anything unusual. Most of it was standard climate data, temperature readings, wind patterns, precipitation measurements, but buried in a folder marked anomalies was something that made my hands stop shaking from fear and start shaking from excitement. Temperature readings from the past week showed impossible patterns. While the valley below was experiencing normal February weather, the summit of Mount Mitchell was recording temperatures that dropped as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit. That was Arctic Ocean cold, not North Carolina mountain cold. More importantly, the temperature drops corresponded exactly with the times when hikers and climbers had gone missing over the past 6 months. Every disappearance on Mount Mitchell coincided with a sudden, impossible temperature drop at the summit. Dave's death had happened during a day when the summit temperature had supposedly dropped to -45 degrees in less than 30 minutes. I opened another file and found something even more interesting. Dr. Kim had been tracking electromagnetic anomalies around the weather station. The readings showed massive energy spikes happening in regular patterns, like something enormous was drawing power from the mountain itself. "Getting warmer," said Dave's voice from outside, but now it was coming from multiple directions at once. Closer to the truth. "Do you understand what we are yet, little ranger?" I looked out the window again and immediately wished I hadn't. There were 4 figures standing in the snow outside the weather station. Dave was still there, but now he was joined by Dr. Vance, Dr. Kim, and a young woman I didn't recognize but who must have been part of their research team. All of them were frozen blue-white. All of them had that same too-wide smile with sharp teeth. And all of them were staring at me with black, empty eyes. "We are the hunger that lives in high places," they said in perfect unison, their voices creating a harmony that made the windows vibrate. "We are the cold that kills. We are the storm that never ends. We are what your people called Wendigo, but we are older than your stories. Older than your mountains. We have been hungry since the ice covered this land, and we will be hungry long after it covers the land again. The four frozen figures began walking toward the weather station in perfect synchronization, their footsteps creating a rhythm like a funeral drum. Your grandfather knew about us. His grandfather's grandfather fought us and lost. But they were wise enough to stay in the valleys where we cannot go. You, however, have climbed to our domain. You have entered our hunting ground, and now you will join our collection. I grabbed Dr. Vance's laptop and stuffed it into my pack, along with all the research files I could carry. Whatever this thing was, the scientists had been documenting it. Their data might be the key to understanding how to fight it. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. "Last chance, Gabe," Dave's voice called. "Come out willingly, and we'll make it quick. Force us to come in, and we'll take our time. We'll freeze you piece by piece until you beg us to finish the job." I checked my gear one more time. Flare gun, climbing rope, emergency shelter, and now a laptop full of data about an impossible predator that fed on human flesh and controlled mountain weather. Not exactly the rescue mission I'd trained for. The door handle began to turn. The door to the weather station opened slowly, but nothing came through. Instead, the temperature inside the building dropped so fast that my breath turned to ice crystals in midair. Frost spread across the walls like living vines, and the concrete floor became slick with a thin layer of ice. "We don't need to come inside." Dave's voice drifted through the open doorway. "We can bring the mountain to you." The building began to shake, not like an earthquake, but like something enormous was pressing down on it from above. Cracks appeared in the concrete walls, and I could hear metal support beams groaning under. Impossible weight. I had maybe 30 seconds before the whole structure collapsed on top of me. I grabbed my pack and ran for the door, hoping to get past the frozen figures while they were focused on destroying the building. But the moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a physical attack. This wasn't normal winter cold. This was the kind of cold that exists in the vacuum between stars, the kind that turns human flesh to ice in seconds. My exposed skin began to burn immediately, and my lungs seized up as the frigid air tried to freeze them solid. Through the swirling snow, I could see all four frozen figures surrounding me in a perfect circle. They weren't moving anymore, just standing there watching while the cold did their work for them. 30 seconds. Dr. Vance's voice said calmly. "That's how long you have before the cold stops your heart." 25 now. I fumbled for my emergency shelter, a reflective tarp designed to retain body heat in survival situations. My fingers were already numb, making it hard to grip anything, but I managed to wrap the tarp around myself like a cloak. It helped, but not enough. The cold was seeping through the material like it wasn't even there. 20 seconds. Your blood is starting to thicken. 15 seconds. Your organs are beginning to shut down. I had to get moving. Standing still meant death, but I had no idea which direction to run. The four figures blocked every escape route down the mountain, and there was nowhere to go except up. The summit of Mount Mitchell was only a few hundred yards away. It made no tactical sense to climb higher when I was being hunted by something that controlled the cold, but every other path was blocked. I ran toward the summit, my boots sliding on the ice-covered rocks. Behind me, I could hear the frozen figures beginning to move. Their footsteps were slow and deliberate, covering impossible distances with each stride. 10 seconds. Dave's voice called after me. 9, 8. The cold was trying to shut down my brain, making it hard to think clearly. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered something from my grandfather's stories. The Wendigo was a creature of hunger and winter, but it was also a creature of the hunt. It didn't just kill, it played with its prey first. If the thing wanted me dead immediately, I would already be frozen solid. It was keeping me alive because it wanted to chase me, which meant I might actually have a chance. I reached the summit just as my legs gave out from the cold. The highest point of Mount Mitchell is marked by a small stone tower built by researchers in the 1800s. I used it for cover, wrapping my emergency shelter tighter around my body and trying to get some feeling back in my hands. The laptop in my pack was still running, protected from the cold by my body heat. I pulled it out and scrolled through Dr. Vance's research files, looking for anything that might help me survive the next few minutes. There, buried in a folder marked Historical Research, was a collection of Cherokee legends about mountain spirits. Dr. Vance had been trying to correlate Native American folklore with modern climate data, looking for patterns that might explain the unusual weather around Mount Mitchell. According to the legends, the Wendigo could be driven away by fire, but not ordinary fire. It had to be sacred fire, blessed by traditional ceremonies and fed with specific materials. Pine sap, sage, and something called bloodwood that I'd never heard of. I looked around desperately. There were a few pine trees near the summit, their branches heavy with sap that had frozen solid in the cold. I could use my lighter to start a fire, but I didn't have any sage or bloodwood. The footsteps were getting closer. Through the snow, I could see all 4 frozen figures climbing toward the summit with inhuman grace. They moved like they weighed nothing at all, stepping up 20-foot cliff faces like they were walking up stairs. "You cannot hide from winter itself, Doctor," Kim's voice called out. "We are the storm. We are the mountain. We are the hunger that has no end." That's when I remembered something else from my grandfather's stories. He'd told me that bloodwood was just the Cherokee name for dogwood trees, and there was a large dogwood growing right beside the stone tower. I pulled out my pocket knife and started scraping bark from the dogwood tree. My hands were so numb I could barely hold the blade, but I managed to collect a small pile of shavings, pine sap from the nearby trees. And for sage, I checked my pockets and found the small pouch my grandfather had given me when I became a ranger. I'd carried it for 15 years without really thinking about it. Inside was dried sage, sweetgrass, and other traditional plants used in Cherokee ceremonies. The frozen figures were only 50 yards away now, moving in perfect formation up the mountain face. I could see their faces clearly, the same people I'd been trying to rescue, but with skin like blue marble and eyes like holes cut in the sky. I gathered the sacred materials in a small pile beside the stone tower and lit them with my emergency lighter. The flame caught immediately, burning brighter and hotter than it should have in the middle of a blizzard. The 4 figures stopped walking. "Sacred fire," Dave's voice said, and for the first time there was uncertainty in it. "The old ways. But you are not a medicine man, little ranger. You are just a drunk who let his friend die." The fire was already starting to die down. I needed more fuel to keep it burning. But there wasn't enough dry wood on the summit. In desperation, I pulled out my hip flask, the one I'd been carrying for 3 months, filled with whiskey I used to numb the guilt over Dave's death. I poured the alcohol over the sacred fire, and it flared up like a torch. The frozen figures took a step backward. "Alcohol is not sacred, Doctor," Vance's voice said, but now it sounded strained. "It cannot banish us." "You're right," I said, surprised to hear my own voice steady. "But this isn't just alcohol. This is my guilt, my shame, my failure to save the people I cared about, and I'm burning it all." I poured the rest of the whiskey on the fire and threw the empty flask into the flames. The metal began to melt immediately, feeding the sacred fire with something that had been destroying me for months. The 4 figures took another step backward, their perfect formation beginning to waver. "We are eternal," they said in unison, but their voices were getting fainter. "We are the hunger that never dies." "Maybe," I said, adding more pine sap to the fire. "But right now, you're trespassing on Cherokee sacred ground, and I'm the ranger responsible for protecting it." The fire roared higher, and for the first time, since I'd started climbing the mountain, I felt warm. The frozen figures began to retreat. The sacred fire burned for 6 hours. I kept it fed with pine sap, dogwood bark, and pieces of equipment from my pack, anything that would burn. The 4 frozen figures retreated to the tree line and watched from a distance, but they didn't try to approach the summit again. As dawn broke over the mountains, they simply faded away like morning mist. The rescue helicopters found me just after sunrise, half frozen but alive beside the stone tower. I'd used my emergency radio to call for help once the supernatural blizzard finally stopped and normal weather returned to the mountain. The official report said I'd suffered severe hypothermia and hallucinations during my night on the summit. The research team was listed as victims of an avalanche triggered by unusual seismic activity. Their bodies were never recovered. I didn't argue with the official story. Who would believe the fulminant truth? But I kept Dr. Vance's laptop and all her research. The data showed patterns going back decades, temperature anomalies that corresponded with disappearances, electromagnetic readings that spiked during hunting seasons. The thing that called itself Wendigo had been feeding on Mount Mitchell for a very long time. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from frostbite, Lost 2 fingers on my left hand and most of the feeling in my feet. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. They were right, but not for the reasons they thought. When I returned to work, I requested a transfer to a different section of the park. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I finally understood what my grandfather had been trying to teach me all those years ago. Some places need guardians. I stopped drinking the day I came down from the mountain, poured out every bottle in my cabin, and haven't touched alcohol since. The urge is still there sometimes, especially on cold nights when the wind sounds like voices calling from the summit. But I've found better ways to deal with the guilt. I monitor Mount Mitchell now from a distance, watching weather patterns and electromagnetic readings for signs that the Wendigo is stirring. I've installed early warning systems that detect sudden temperature drops, and I maintain relationships with Cherokee elders who still remember the old protective ceremonies. Most importantly, I make sure no one climbs the mountain alone during winter months. I tell them it's for safety reasons, which is true, just not in the way they think. Dave Morrison was wrong about one thing. The cold doesn't become warm when you stop fighting it. It just becomes cold. But you can learn to carry fire inside yourself, sacred fire that burns bright enough to keep the darkness at bay. I haven't seen the Wendigo since that night on the summit, but I know it's still there. Sometimes hikers report seeing tall figures moving through the trees near the summit. Sometimes the weather station records impossible temperature readings that last just long enough to raise alarms. When that happens, I climb partway up the mountain with sage and pine sap and dogwood bark. I light a sacred fire at the tree line and tend it until the readings return to normal. I never go all the way to the summit anymore. That's the Wendigo's domain, and I respect the boundary. But I watch, and I wait, and I remember, because that's what guardians do. Last week, a new research team requested permission to study climate patterns on Mount Mitchell. I approved their permit but added strict safety protocols: no winter climbing, mandatory check-ins every 4 hours, and GPS beacons that can't be turned off. I also gave them a list of Cherokee sacred sites to avoid and traditional plants that should never be disturbed. They thanked me for being so culturally sensitive. If only they knew. Tonight, as I write this report, the temperature readings from the summit are starting to fluctuate again. Nothing dramatic yet, just small variations that wouldn't concern most people. But I know the patterns now. I know what they mean. The Wendigo is getting hungry again. Time to gather some wood and climb the mountain. After all, I've got a job to do.